Morning, everyone. Welcome to another edition of Inquisition Update. My name's Tom Fress, and I'll be your host for the next hour. You're listening to FirstAmendmentRadio.net. Thanks for tuning in. We'll continue now where we left off in the book Rome and Civil Liberty by James A. Wiley. Yesterday we concluded with a discussion of the interrogatories imposed upon the Maynooth, the Jesuit-run school and seminary, college and seminary in Maynooth. And what was concluded was that, for all intents and purposes, according to the authorities at Maynooth, the Queen of England was no queen, and the laws of Parliament, the laws of Parliament were no laws at all, but lies, and basically, in other words, stated the very things that were published in the tablet, the Roman Catholic official publication, and that without stating it overtly, Catholics were already relieved of any allegiance to the Queen or the Parliament, and they were relieved of any obligation to obey its laws. And so Rome is acting upon her claim to governorship of England. And that's the conclusion that James A. Wiley makes. Effectively, the crown of England had been overthrown by the papacy. Now he concludes at the bottom of page 181, if you're following along in your own copy of the book. He says, we see against what a subtle foe the nations of Europe, now fighting for their independence, have to contend. Okay? All of Europe, liberated by Protestantism, now has to contend with the papacy reclaiming its jurisdiction over Europe. And he says, truly it may be said of them, and of our own nation among the rest, that they, quote, wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities, against powers, against the rulers of the darkness of this world, against spiritual wickedness in high places, unquote. The papacy has gone deep indeed into the darkness. Thick clouds encompass it, through which mortals cannot gaze. But from the midst of the gloom and silence in which it sits, it launches its bolt upon the world. That, speaking of a bolt of lightning. And it says, its hand is not seen, but the stroke is all the more sudden and sure. If the bolt is invisible, not so the destruction which it inflicts. Kings are tumbled from their seats, the ties that bind nations are disrupted, and the furies of revolution and war, obedient to the summons of this invisible demon, start up to scourge mankind and desolate the earth. And truly prophetic were James A. Wiley's words at the conclusion of that portion of the chapter. The nations have been deluged in war and rebellion and upheaval, and it's all a direct or indirect effect of the papacy trying to reassemble the power and control that it had before the Protestant Reformation. And Rome was just as busy in England at this time as she was on the mainland, and she was just as busy in the colonies and in the United States of America, and still is today. That's the agenda that is behind all the politics in the world today, is to reassemble the papacy's kingdom. Now we'll continue on page 182. This portion of the book is entitled Spiritual Direction at the Hustings. And for those who haven't heard the word hustings before, that is a political campaign and debates that we're experiencing even as we speak. The upcoming election has aroused the hustings. That's where all the candidates get together and debate the issues and appeal for votes. And so we're going to be talking about the spiritual direction under which Roman Catholics must subject themselves during times of election. Okay? The priest factors large in politics. He controls the laity of the Roman Catholic Church and tells them for whom to vote. All right? Politics is the means to a religious end to the Roman Catholic Church. In order to make Roman Catholic canon law the law of the land, it must be done through the political process, and this is why politics is so important in the Roman Catholic Church and why the priests have so much spiritual direction upon the people. He continues now, page 182, it says, "It only remains that we glance at the manner in which Popery, as it limns its own likeness in the Maynooth Report, conducts itself in the hustings, and at the spiritual direction which it there tenders to those whose conscience it has entirely in its keeping. It is the priest, and the priest alone, that votes in Ireland. No doubt his flocks go to the poll, doubly armed, with the franchise which government has provided them with, and the shillelagh with which they have provided themselves. But both franchise and shillelagh are at the service of the priest. And as regards any really independent and intelligent exercise of the right of election, the ostensible voters might as well be absent, and the matter left exclusively in the hands of the priests, the real voter." Okay? So the priests have so much quote-unquote spiritual direction over Roman Catholics at the time of elections that the voters just as well stay home and let the priest vote. That's how much control the priests had over the laity in times of elections. Now it continues, he says, "Such an arrangement would make not a particle of difference in the result and would greatly benefit the cause of public order." In other words, it would help society. Given the fact that the priests have so much control over who is voted for in the Roman Catholic world, it would help society if they just come out and admit this and let all their voters stay home and not congest the streets and not subject to the hustle and bustle and just let the priests go vote. Okay? A bit cynical, but nonetheless, the author is trying to make a point that is valid even and especially today. He says, "If there is no temporal matter that is purely so, surely a matter that so nearly touches the emoluments, and more especially the prospective emoluments of the Church, as the parliamentary franchise does, must involve in a large degree the question of sin and duty." Maynooth takes this view decidedly on the matter. We find the Reverend Dr. O'Hanlon, librarian of the college and prefect before the Dunboyne establishment, before the commission. He is asked whether voters at elections be a temporal or a spiritual matter, and he answers thus, quote, "A vote for a member of Parliament may become a spiritual matter because its direct and immediate effect may sometimes be the commission or the avoidance of sin. In the case supposed, I should think no Catholic priest or layman would hesitate to vote for the man who is disposed to favor and protect Catholic interests in Parliament. If the electors require information or instruction, as they do frequently in many parts of Ireland, I think the priest, as such, is not only justified, but bound to teach and explain their duty." What do you mean by their duty, the question is asked. The answer, to select the parties whom they conscientiously believe to be fittest to represent them in the House of Commons, and to discharge the duties of a member of Parliament. Question, would he, the priest, be warranted in withholding any sacraments of the Church from a man by reason of his preferring one candidate to another? Answer, absolutely speaking, he would, because a priest is not only warranted, but bound to withhold the sacraments from a man who is disposed to commit a mortal sin. And as the case may absolutely arise in which a person, by preferring one candidate to another, would exhibit that disposition, a case may consequently arise in which the priest would be not only warranted, but bound to withhold the sacraments from a man by reason of his preferring one candidate to another, unquote. So you can see through this language that the priest controls who they vote for, and if a Roman Catholic would prefer another candidate to the one that the priest recommended, he is subject to have the sacraments of the church withheld from him. Which is just another way of saying he cannot participate in the Mass. He cannot get married. He cannot have a child baptized. He can't even have a legal Christian burial. In other words, he's excommunicated from the church. Now, if excommunication or denial of the sacraments to a Roman Catholic means that he's been cast into eternal hell and denied entrance to the kingdom of heaven, what do you think that man's going to do? Well, he's going to vote as the priest tells him to vote, isn't he? That's how much power the priests have over the electorate. Roman Catholics. So, what does politics serve? From the position of Maynooth, this Jesuit college, politics serves the Pope. It's Roman Catholicism that they're most concerned with upholding at the polls. Those candidates most favored by the Pope. Those candidates that will uphold the Pope's spiritual and temporal power and convert the laws of the land into Roman Catholic canon law. That's who the priest would prefer that all the Roman Catholics would vote for. And it means so much to them that if someone, a Roman Catholic, decides to vote for another candidate, a different candidate, it's very much in the priest's power to deny him the sacraments and to damn him to hell. That's how important it is for the Roman Catholic Church to control politics. Now he says, when the superior fitness of a certain candidate is quote-unquote undeniable, and the judgment of the priest is clearly expressed in his favor, it would be quote-unquote mortal sin, according to Dr. O'Hanlon, to vote for another candidate. And the voter who is suspected of mediating the commission of so great a crime is to be deterred by the threat of, quote, withholding the sacraments, unquote, that is, by threat of damnation. If you do not choose to obey the priest, he has no power, he says, to compel you. He cannot coerce the body. He can only direct the conscience. He cannot hang you in this world. He can only burn you eternally in the other. The dominion of the Roman Father is confined to the domain of conscience, and his rod of rule is eminently and purely spiritual. But behind the spiritual direction of the mitre, and at no great distance, is ever the physical force of the mob. To return to Father O'Hanlon, we might extract much more of the same nature from his evidence, but we content ourselves with only one other passage. Quote, whether it would be a sin or not in a particular case, the elector himself is the judge, according to his own conscience? That's the question. Now the answer is, of course, he is ultimately the sole judge, but his judgment must be grounded on rational motives. Otherwise it would be rash and imprudent and might be erroneous, as it would undoubtedly if it stood in opposition to the morally certain opinion of the priest, unquote. Now, these principles, say James A. Wiley, these principles received an ample illustration at the first general election in Ireland after the papal aggression, that of 1852. The Catholic Defense Association, intent on creating a powerful Romanist party in Parliament, framed beforehand a list of candidates. See, Rome picks the candidates. Framed beforehand a list of candidates and set a working the whole machinery of their church to force these candidates upon the constituencies. Look, if the Vatican picks all the candidates, the Pope doesn't care who you vote for. That's how it went in Ireland. That's how it is in the United States of America. Those who vet presidents of the United States in this country and other positions of high office are the Council on Foreign Relations or the Knights of Columbus. They are the ones who vet the candidates. As a matter of fact, there are many places in the United States that are known that if you're not endorsed by the Knights of Columbus, you can't even run for dog catcher in this country. That was revealed by Crowley in his book. The title of it escapes me just now, but we read it here years ago on Inquisition Update, and we may revisit that book again in the near future. Crowley was his name. Now, he says the Catholic Defense Association, intent on creating a powerful Romanist party in Parliament. You think there might be a Romanist party in Washington, D.C.? Guess what? Both political parties, and there are only two, both political parties are Romanist parties in the United States of America. They both work one side or the other of the papacy's agenda. Okay, the Republicans, the warmongers, they're the ones who put themselves out as conservative. They're the ones that lead us off into the Crusades. Okay, foreign wars. They're the warmongers for the Pope. The liberals, they're the ones who bind us to government dependence through social programs. Okay, socialist security. They both make us dependent upon the government. And if the government serves the papacy, both agendas are papal agendas. And when the society gets tired of the right-wing agenda constantly winning, they'll vote for the Democrats. And if the Democrats wear out their welcome among the voters, they simply vote for the Republicans. And back and forth it goes, just like the pendulum on a grandfather clock, swinging first left and then right, and then left and right, back and forth, back and forth. But guess what? The papal agenda, the hands on the clock, turn the same direction all the time. With every swing of the pendulum, the papacy's agenda is advanced. That's how the system works. That's why it makes no sense to vote Democratic or Republican, because they are both papal agendas. We've described this before. And the Pope makes sure that both the Democratic Party and the Republican Party are filled with papists and Romanists who are most concerned about advancing the papal agenda, converting the laws of the land into Roman Catholic canon law, and strengthening the power and control of the papacy. And they believe they're doing God's service because they believe the Pope is the vicar of Christ on earth. All right? The Catholic Defense Association, intent on creating a powerful Romanist party in Parliament, framed beforehand a list of candidates and set a working the whole machinery of the church to force these candidates upon the constituencies. How do they force certain candidates upon the constituencies? They just make sure all the candidates are papists. And you have nothing but a papist to vote for. You have no choice in the matter. That's how they force the candidates upon you. Now he says, electors were taken from their beds at midnight and sworn upon crucifixes. Whole congregations were driven to church and had their voting tickets dealt out to them from the altar. The confessional was employed to discover who had pledged themselves to independent candidates and released from their promises in virtue of the dispensing power. Now, I want you to make sure you understand this. They'd call them into the confessional box. The priest would question them about their political allegiances, and if they had sworn some allegiance to an independent candidate not chosen by the priest, then the priest would just ipso facto release him from any obligation to vote or to support or to campaign for that independent candidate. The Pope, the priest in the confessional box would just wave his all-powerful hand, and whatever oath he swore to a particular candidate was just dissolved. All right? Now, we're according to the Scripture, we're to keep our oaths. We're to keep our pledges. We're to be true to our word. And if we can't be true to our word, we're not to swear at all. But in Roman Catholicism, the priest has the power to absolve you of any oath that you've sworn. All right, that's the use that the confessional box has. It was employed to discover who had pledged themselves to independent candidates, in other words, candidates not chosen by the priests, and they were released from their promises to those campaigns in virtue of the dispensing power of the priest. The dispensing power, the power to bind and to loose. In other words, to bind upon the conscience certain obligations and to loosen from the conscience some obligation. In other words, there's no fidelity at all in the Roman Catholic system. That's why it's an antichrist church. All right? Now, he says, electors were taught that paradise was to be earned or damnation incurred at the hustings, at the campaigns. So it was a salvific issue who you supported for the election. If you supported a candidate not chosen by the priests or the popes, then you might go to hell for it. After all, the priest does have dispensing power, does he not? He can release you from an oath. He can bind the conscience to obey certain rules and regulations and laws. He can also bind your conscience to eternal torment in hell. Okay, that's the power of the priest. He says, if any should dare to vote otherwise than in the church's behalf, for whom there were in reserve the most terrible penalties. Okay? The most terrible penalties await a parishioner who defies the authority of the priest and votes for someone else. Now he says, in vain should they implore at the hands of the priest the baptism of the child, or the last sacrament for themselves at the hour of death. Okay? Once they've defied the priest and gone to the polls and vote for a candidate that was hostile to Romanism, well, they couldn't have their child baptized. They couldn't participate in the sacrament of the Mass and have grace infused. They couldn't even be read their last rites. They were denied the sacraments. They were ipso facto excommunicated from the church. And of course, Roman Catholic canon law teaches that outside the church there is no salvation. It truly is a matter of life and death, eternal life and death, when the priest tells you who to vote for. It's just as important here in the United States, if not more so, than it was in Ireland. We'll be back right after this.
Since the beginning of time, Kings have sought it, nations have fought for it. It has been traded, it has been borrowed, it has been purchased, it has been stolen. There's a reason for it. To secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and to our posterity, invest with the security of gold and silver. Call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188 or visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net. Listen to Financial Survival with your host, Melody Cedarstrom, right here on FirstAmendmentRadio.com at 4 p.m. Eastern or 1 p.m. Pacific Time. Visit discountgoldandsilvertrading.net or call Discount Gold and Silver Trading at 1-800-375-4188. Toll free, 1-800-375-4188.
The book of Revelation says, the spirit of prophecy is the testimony of Jesus Christ. This is at the very heart of FirstAmendmentRadio.com. In that spirit, we have created the Prophecy Reality News app for all of your mobile devices, streaming First Amendment Radio 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Available for your Apple, Android device, and smartphone, absolutely free. Get the Prophecy Reality News app installed today so you can listen to First Amendment Radio wherever you are. The Prophecy Reality News app. Get it now.
Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
I know you all want answers, and believe me, so do I, and I'll do my best to get them.
Despite Nicolas Cage's promise to do his best to get left behind rapture answers for us, don't hold your breath. Not everyone believes Left Behind is true prophecy. Some may even regard as conspiratorial the mainstream re-release of the Left Behind movie with actor Nicolas Cage portraying the main character as an attempt to further reinforce in the minds of all this perception of false prophecy in order to condition the masses for the play about to begin. If you want true Bible prophecy answers, get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. The author exposes the Latin rapture origin, the 7-year tribulation deception, true Bible revelation of Daniel's 70 weeks, the abomination of desolation, the restrainer, America in the Revelation, the image of the beast and the mark of the beast, and the truth about God's chosen people, and so much more about Bible prophecy. This book will shatter the Left Behind paradigm of future events. Get the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. Visit crosstheborder.org, CROSS, crosstheborder.org, to get your print, EPUB, or PDF version of the book, The Rapture Will Be Canceled. That's crosstheborder.org.
Okay, welcome back from the break. You're listening to the second half hour of Inquisition Update on First Amendment Radio. If you'd like to support the program, please support First Amendment Radio, who sponsors it. And if you'd like to email me, please do so. My email address is tom@seawaves.us. Now, before the break, we were James A. Wiley was telling us that if a parishioner in the Roman Catholic Church defied the priest and voted for an independent candidate for some political office, he could come under the censure of the priest to the tune of eternal damnation. Okay, it's a serious thing, especially in Ireland at this time. And I assert that it's just as dangerous today in the Roman Catholic Church in the United States of America. Now, I want to touch on something that I haven't dealt with for a while. For my regular listeners, this will be redundant, and I apologize for that. But there are new listeners all the time. And James A. Wiley reveals here, as we stated before the break, that if they vote against the priest, if they vote for another candidate not chosen by the priest, not advised by the priest, it would be useless for them to seek help from the priest. I mean, he made the priest his enemy by voting for another candidate. And therefore the priest would deny the baptism of his child. All right? Now, some might be sitting there thinking, and I would too if I had not known anything about Roman Catholic canon law or the sacraments. So big deal, the priest won't baptize the child. Just go find somebody else to baptize the child, or don't have the baby baptized at all. The teaching in the Roman Catholic Church used to be, years and years and years ago, that it was absolutely imperative that the father and mother of a brand new child bring that baby to the church as soon as possible after birth to have them baptized by the priest. Now, it was believed, and it still is believed in the Roman Catholic Church, a thing called baptismal regeneration. That somehow or other, when the priest uses his little shell in the baptismal font to gather up some water and sprinkle it over the forehead of the baby, that the baby's spiritual birth begins. The real life of the child begins, and he becomes a member of the Roman Catholic Church. He's comforted. This new child, not even aware of his surroundings, is now under the protection of the Roman Catholic Church. And if the baby dies after that, then he goes to heaven, immediately goes to heaven. Now, it used to be taught in the Roman Catholic Church that if the baby died between the birth canal and the church, the baptismal font at the church, the baby was lost, eternally lost. It had not undergone the priestly baptismal regeneration. It was born dead, and it died before it got to the baptismal font, and it was lost forever. Well, that had a tendency to alienate too many Roman Catholics, and it became a liability to the church. So they changed their teaching. They changed their teaching to the degree that the baby doesn't automatically go to hell after it dies. It goes to another place now called limbo. It's neither heaven nor hell. Again, it's an imaginary place because the Bible speaks nothing of it. It doesn't exist. But preaching that the baby goes to limbo is less liability to the church than preaching that the baby goes to hell. So that is the teaching of the Roman Catholic Church. Now, if a man votes for another candidate, one that is possibly hostile to the Roman Catholic Church and against the advice of his priest, the priest can withdraw his priestly baptism of his child and subject the child, depending upon which age we're talking about, either damn the baby to eternal damnation or damn him to limbo, which is neither heaven nor hell. So you can see a prospective father would be well to obey the priest's command in who to vote for. Because mom's about ready to deliver a baby, and we certainly don't want that baby to go to hell, do we? So we better vote for who the priest says to vote for. You see the power of the priest? You see why it's the Church of Antichrist? Now, the other sacraments of the Roman Catholic Church hold just as much threat to the eternal damnation or salvation of a Roman Catholic. And the sacraments are held in the hands of the priest. And it is through his dispensing power that he dispenses these sacraments. And if he withholds them, they are withheld. So the priest literally holds the souls, the everlastings of every Roman Catholic in the palms of his hands. He is upon the earth God Almighty. And that's how much power he has over the conscience of Roman Catholics. Now, many Roman Catholics in this country are going to roll their eyes and say, "Oh, he's all wet about this. I mean, he's trying to make too much of this." Look, the United States has a Roman Catholic Church that is different than any other Roman Catholic Church in the world. You see, the Roman Catholic Church that was built in this country had to contend with Protestantism. It had to contend with the light. It had to contend with Christians, true Bible-believing Christians. It had to contend with the Scriptures. So it had to conform. And so Roman Catholicism is only a shadow of itself here in the United States of America. But you take a Roman Catholic country like Ireland or Spain or Portugal or France or Austria, this is the power of the Roman Catholic Church. The power of the priest is wielded all over this world. And even to the degree that it can, it wields the same power the same way, even right here in the United States of America. The Roman Catholic Church in the United States is becoming the typical Roman Catholic Church. It is the more power the papacy has in the world, the more you will find the Roman Catholic Church in America becoming more Tridentine, that is, holders to the Council of Trent, and reverential of the priest, and reverential of the Pope as the vicar of Christ on the earth. And the lamb's wool will come off, and underneath you will find the wolf, the proverbial wolf. And that's what's being advanced in the country today. Now, this particular, continuing where we left off before the break, this particular Roman Catholic that might disobey his priest and vote for an independent candidate would not only be denied the sacraments, they would be banished from society here. Their future lot would be assigned them with Judas, and their eternal companions would be devils. That an ignorant and superstitious people who believe in the reality of these tremendous threatenings as firmly as they believe in their own existence should be able to exercise, in the face of a tyranny like this, the rights with which the British Constitution has clothed them, is utterly incredible. But that's Romanism. That's Romanism. Even in a country like ours, where our rights are written in the Constitution, Roman Catholics will give up those rights to the priests. It defies common sense. It defies self-preservation. It defies all rationality. But still, Roman Catholics, even in this country, give that much power and authority to their priests to determine their very eternal existence on whether or not we vote for one particular candidate or another. It goes beyond one's ability to comprehend unless you're a Roman Catholic. Now he says, this consideration may suffice to show how utterly beyond human power it is to franchise a people situated as are the Irish Romanists. What good does it do to give an Irish Roman Catholic the privilege of voting in an in an election when he has given over his vote to the priest? You know, I remember not long ago after the Iraq War, you saw all the people in the streets with their fingers colored purple. That was their voting registration. They had to dip their finger in indelible ink when they finished voting to keep them from voting twice. And the commentators on the TVs and commentators on amateur radio, commentators and everywhere else wondered how these people who have lived in abject slavery all of their lives in fear of Saddam Hussein and his sons, how could they ever use their vote effectively? How will they ever learn to think for themselves and to listen to the candidates for election in their country and make conscientious decisions when they have never experienced this kind of freedom before? Well, the same might be asked of Irish Roman Catholics. What good does it give independent voting rights to Roman Catholics when they automatically, on pain of excommunication and eternal damnation, hand those votes directly to the priest? It makes no sense at all. Now he says this consideration may suffice to show how utterly beyond human power it is to enfranchise a people situated as are the Irish Romanists. We defy you to make them free and independent citizens. Do for them what you may, or give to them what you will. Load them with the immunities and votes, enact measure after measure for their political enfranchisement. The whole of that power passes wholesale and at once into the hands of the priests. You have but augmented the power of the church and deepened the slavery of the people. What strange delusion was it, future ages will ask, which led the men of the 19th century to strive so earnestly to extend political rights to the Irish, and then pay so dearly for the rearing up of a class of men to rob them of them. Man, I want to make sure you understand what James A. Wiley is saying. You bent over backwards, you English Protestants. You bent over backwards to make sure that the Irish Roman Catholics had a right to vote. And they handed their vote to the priest, and the priest voted for the candidate who would make Roman Catholic canon law replace the Constitution, would make the College of Cardinals replace the Parliament, and would make the Pope replace the Queen. And then make you all slaves to the Pope, against your consciences, and against your Christ, and against his word. Do you see now why I say England was hiring its own executioner? England was hiring its own inquisitor? The very same thing and worse has been done right here in the United States of America. And we have no one but ourselves to blame, because we have forgotten our Protestant heritage. We've forgotten our Protestant history. And it needs to be restored, and first and foremost in the Protestant churches in this country. Yes, it's one thing to preach the gospel, but it's quite another to preach the gospel and then blind the people from the events of history that bring depth and measure and meaning to the scriptures and the prophecies. History is simply the unfolding of Bible prophecy. And if we fail to understand history, we cannot possibly understand the prophecies. It's only speculation. All right? History puts flesh and bones on Bible prophecy. Without a knowledge of history, it's just a prophecy without flesh or bones. Now, I'm not trying to be sacrilegious. If you understand what I'm saying, you can be perfectly compatible with what I just said. All right. I'll give you an example just to ease your mind. We know the Old Testament, the Psalms, and the prophets all prophesied the coming of Messiah. And we know from history that he did come. History recorded in the Bible and other history. Now, what if someone would have hidden all that history from us and there was no historical record of Christ ever being born? It would still be prophecy, wouldn't it? And we might be looking for another Messiah. You see how critical it is to understand Bible prophecy and history? Bible prophecy is fulfilled and confirmed in history. You can have a Bible full of prophecy, but if you have no knowledge of history, you have no knowledge of any fulfillment of Bible prophecy. And we might still be looking for the Christ. I hope I've made my point. Now, James A. Wiley continues. He says, nothing could be plainer or simpler than the rule laid down for popish representatives in Parliament. They are taught in all their speeches and votes to have regard but to one thing, the interests of Catholicism. The interests of Catholicism. Now stop. Think. What does every Roman Catholic in government, whether it be on the city council, the library board, the county commission, or the school board, or the state legislature, what does every Roman Catholic represent in those governmental institutions? The interests of Catholicism. And if a Roman Catholic sits on a commission of any rank in this country and ceases to achieve the interests of Catholicism, he is swiftly removed from his office. Most times under scandal. Some sex scandal, or some gambling scandal, or some homosexual scandal, or some dalliance, or some other illegal activity, but they are gotten rid of, and they're ruined for life. That's how Rome plays the game. Politics is a bloody, bloody game, especially when Catholicism is the main interest of it. Now he says they are free to act according to their fealty to the Queen only when the prior claims of the pontiff are satisfied. In other words, it's legal, whenever expedient, to continue to be subjects of the Queen, but only so long as it's approved by the pontiff. Okay, we determined that earlier at the end of the broadcast yesterday and at the very beginning today. What was determined by the council at Maynooth is that officially, without being publicly announced by the papacy, officially the Queen had been retired by the Pope. And the Parliament's laws were not laws but lies, not to be obeyed. The government of the Pope had replaced it. Now, since the Queen still sits on a throne and has a crown on her head, and the Pope hasn't actually come to England to remove her crown and make a public statement such as this, or to stand before Parliament and just simply tell them all to go home and then replace all their seats with the College of Cardinals, then the established government of England was still a government in fact. But it was not a government de jure. In other words, it did not have the approval of the Pope. And so, whenever it was convenient for Roman Catholics to obey the Queen or to remain subject, they did so long as it was okay with the Pope. But whenever it became expedient to overthrow the Queen, overthrow her crown in a civil war or rebellion, that too is okay if it's okay with the Pope. So effectively, the allegiance of the people had been erased, and they were simply driving themselves upon the expediency. And that's the condition under which we live in the United States today. To my best estimation. We still have a presidency, we still have a Congress. To the degree that it's advantageous for the papacy to allow Roman Catholics to be subject to it, they are. But as long as Rome is the gainer in the end, then it's perfectly fine. As long as the Pope is really the power and control, and the advancement of the Church is still on track, they may pretend to be subjects of the government. Now, some would argue that Rome is so much in control of the government today that Roman Catholics are obliged to obey the civil power, and that we Protestants are just left ignorant of the fact that Rome controls our government completely. I find both cases plausible. But certainly there is no Protestant government in this country. Christ is not the King of Kings and Lord of Lords in the United States of America. It's the papacy. All right? They are free to act according to their fealty to the Queen only when the prior claims of the pontiff are satisfied. With them, it ever must be Rome first, England next. Okay? No papist is ever a citizen of Britain. No papist is ever a citizen of the United States of America. He is a citizen first and foremost of Rome. And it says the account of their stewardship is to be rendered in the confessional. You see what importance the confessional plays? Now, the confessional today isn't even isolated to the confessional booth in a Roman Catholic church. The confessional is your own computer. Your confessional is your own cell phone. Your confessional is your own television. Your confessional is your own Facebook page. You're confessing your sins every time you pick up a mode of communication in this country. So we're all Catholics in that we all confess our sins to the government, which is the confessional box of the Roman Catholic Church now. I know this is going to sound outrageous to people that have never heard it before, but it's absolutely a fact. He says they are free to act according to their fealty to the Queen only when the prior claims of the pontiff are satisfied. With them, it ever must be Rome first, England next. The account of their stewardship is to be rendered in the confessional. In fact, it is not to their constituents, but to the priests that they are accountable. And you better believe the highest ranking individual at the National Security Agency in the United States is either a Jesuit priest or a Knight of Malta or some other delegate of the Pope. And all of the information that they claim that they record about Americans is kept by that priest. All right? There's your confessional box, that big black box out in Washington. The National Security Agency. They have breached all of your Protestant rights. They have made you confess your sins every time you open your mouth, every time you make a keystroke on a computer, every time you write a piece of mail, every time you write an email, every conversation that you have on Skype or Facebook or anything else. Every time you utter a word on your cell phone, it's all recorded. That's admitted. That's not an accusation. That's an admission. So that's how Rome has overthrown this country. That's the degree to which the confessional box has imposed itself upon our lives today, whether you're Catholic or Protestant. This is what happens when Rome gets control of a nation. We're experiencing it on a daily basis, on a moment-by-moment basis here in the United States of America. They know, the government knows, the papacy knows, the local bishop in your area knows if you're a heretic or not. Okay? They have your baptismal records. They know if you were baptized in a Roman Catholic Church or whether you were baptized in an ecumenical Evangeli church or if you've never been baptized at all. Data mining. As if the Pope was God on earth, that can see in the dark, that knows the very thoughts of a man's mind. That's the power of the papacy today in the United States of America and the world. And it was brought here by Protestants, just like it was in England. And they call me intolerant. I'll be back Monday. Say a little prayer for me, will you?
The program you are listening to is 100% sponsored by you, the listener, on this First Amendment Rights Media channel. You will notice that there are few commercials on this radio network. There's a good reason for that. Corporate advertising dollars come with strings that limit program content. So without your help, these programs cannot continue on internet or our several affiliates. If you benefit by the educational law programs, we ask you to give. If you are admonished or nurtured by the Bible and ministry programs, we ask you to give. If some voice a cause that you are passionate about, we ask you to give. If you believe in any of these, we ask you to support them as you would a missionary on a continual basis, as if giving a tithe for missionary radio. These programs are not commercially viable and must be supported by those faithful to the cause of truth. Look for the button to sponsor your favorite programs at our listen and schedule pages on the internet. Then, when you subscribe, we will send you the last quarterly MP3 CD of that program immediately, and continue to do so with each new quarter. We will also give you unlimited archive access to all of our programs. We're asking you to give much less than a tithe, so that you may also send support directly to a particular program host, cause, and anywhere else the Spirit may lead you. Do all to the glory of our God and Creator, for His holy nation, the only kingdom that will last forever. Thank you for listening.